Souls everywhere. Before we start with the Souls fatigue, why are there so many of these games? Can't developers make anything else? Nah, I love it. It's great because the games are great and there is no reason to hate it. Too much of a great thing is a great thing and I will die on this hill. Then respawn and fail to make it back and lose an hour of progress. Lies of P DLC, Code Vein 2, Nioh 3, Mortal Shell 2, and we got Elden Ring DLC, Night Rain, and soon, even the Switch is getting a Bloodborne spin-off. Every state of play, we get hyped for the Bloodborne 2 announcement we know is never coming. Souls is everywhere, and this is a good thing. See, fatigue vanishes when something great shows up, just like the tale of hero shooter, comic book, and live service fatigue all magically vanished when Marvel Heroes came out. There's going to be nobody talking about Souls fatigue when Elden Ring 2 sells 10 million copies in a single day. What really is happening is fatigue from tourists. Tourists who just want something different all the time, who jump from thing to thing, who just want to be part of whatever is big at the right now. Or as are often called in gaming, filthy casuals. The people who play a Souls game every time a big one comes out and rehash the whining over the difficulty every single time, seemingly immune to realizing there's easy games out there meant specifically for them. People who demand every single game must be made for everyone, where made for everyone specifically means for them. Someone with limited attention who wants to master a game within half an hour so they can move on from it the next time a big game comes out. People who decide what to play based on whatever new game has a high Twitch viewership. And there's nothing wrong with going game to game. In some ways, the opposite has its own problems. Those people who have been playing Call of Duty, League of Legends, or World of Warcraft, and almost nothing else since launch, have missed entire generations of amazing games. But what the tourists are really angry about is not that there is Souls fatigue or too many Souls games. If there really were, they just wouldn't play those games. They would go play other massive games. And that is their problem. Not that too many great Souls games come out, but that too few other massive hits come out that they can sink major time into. And that is not me saying that there aren't a significant amount of non-Souls games. It sounds like that. Here, I'll explain. When Elden Ring came out, people were sinking hundreds of hours into it, and still enjoying it. I have beat it maybe 7 times, and still would be happy to keep going out and giving it another playthrough. Heck, I sunk a few thousand hours in Dark Souls 1, and I regret nothing. You can get months from the game with ease. At the same time, half a dozen cinematic games will come out. Games meant for the casual gamer, so there's really more of these other games. Yes, that makes sense. However, the same people are not making the same complaints about the oversaturation of cinematic games, walking simulators, choose your own adventure, visual novels. Despite in reality, if there is a real thing to be fatigued about, this is probably it. But for every 500-hour Elden Ring, those 6 cinematic games will combine to at most 20 hours. You get everything you want from them in one playthrough, and while casuals do eat these up and do not get fatigued from them, players that would get fatigued from cinematic games, gamers that prefer a game with great gameplay first over the graphics and the story, they don't get fatigued by cinematic games because they just don't play these games, or at least not very often. They're spending their hundreds of hours on games with major replay value, or that they can sink a lot of time into, like in live service game, like a shooter with co-op or competitive play, or something like an Elden Ring. And that is to say, people get fatigued on the likes of the MCU or Souls games because they have decided to keep engaging with them even though they really don't want to. It's all about their own decisions, and they prefer to consume a product once, so a 5-hour movie game is perfect for them. But spending over 100 hours on a single game, like a Souls game, that is, well, fatiguing. The fatigue is not a result of the Souls games that are so good they are enticed to keep playing them. It is other genres that are just not bringing their A games, or the games that the general audience ends up enjoying. These cinematic games are so short, even if you do get 2 or 3 a month, even a casual gamer will still finish them all in a weekend or 2. Think about it this way. Is there anything you really love that you can take part in constantly, or maybe eat every day and never grow tired of it? Is there something else you can think of that you enjoy, but if you do it a few times, you lose the enjoyment? Poor impulse control is at fault. People who consume games as a social consumer feel a need to play games they know they will not enjoy, but they'll still do it if the game is big enough. And rather than being responsible and learning from it, they go to social media and they get mad. And this is why the same people get angry about the difficulty of Dark Souls games, and they've been doing it for over a decade. Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, Nioh, Stranger of Paradise, Code Vein, Mortal Shell, Lords of the Fallen, Hellpoint, from mainstream to the relatively unknown, this has become a massive genre with so many different flavors, from sprawling games selling tens of millions like Elden Ring, to simple indie, from open world to side-scrolling platformers, a new genre that popped up about a decade ago and became an instant classic for so many people. And one of the things that makes Souls games so often become hits is Soul games retain one of the biggest boons of the retro era of gaming. Despite being a new genre, it is something that is thoroughly rooted in the best parts of the early years. Souls-like games are almost consistently at least 95% gameplay. When you pick up one of these games, you're going to be spending pretty much all of your time playing that game. It sounds crazy to even say these sorts of things when we're talking about a game, but you already know exactly what I'm getting at, don't you? It is a retro throwback to the arcades, to games before the cinematic and narrative games. They need to all have great combat, a world to explore, and interesting battles to overcome. They rely on this to get players interested. They have to nail this, or there's nothing else for people to enjoy. In a way, Souls are a response themselves to the fatigue of games where gameplay is low on the developer's list of interest, an industry where combat often feels tacked on, unengaging, repetitive, or like it was taken from another game, where gamers are more and more often looking at an uninspired gameplay demo and saying, "Oh, an Unreal Engine game, think I'll pass." If you've been watching the back-to-back game conferences as the new version of E3 kicks off, how many cinematic and walking through scenery trailers are being shown? Think about what that means. This is one of the biggest advertising opportunities of the year, and half of these studios are trying to sell you a video game by not showing you video gameplay. No wonder gamers are showing fatigue for this sort of stuff. In turn, they end up embracing the games that are all gameplay first. If there is an overabundance of anything in gaming right now, it is people who cannot write a good movie or a TV show, and they've been looking at the massive growth in size in gaming audiences with indescribable envy, and proving they also cannot write a good video game. Well, the development teams are being slashed, so studios can put more budget toward consultants, HR, DEI departments, narrative, and cinematic teams that are comprised of newcomers who mostly hate games, hate gamers, and are causing the entire AAA industry to crash and burn and be buried under layoffs and overpriced failures. Mocap studios, recognizable actors, super realistic graphics which cost a studio $50 million plus to achieve, but the realistic characters are deliberately made to look ugly and unpleasant to look at, completely nullifying all that money spent. And don't get me wrong, there is room for these cinematic narrative games, but these are games that largely used to be indie niche games. Think Monkey Island, maybe one of the most famous of the narrative retro games. It costs about $200,000 to make. Myst, a PC bestseller for a decade, cost $500,000. To put this into perspective for other games made in the 1990s, so you don't think that, oh, maybe that's like the equivalent of $100 million today. This was an era when man and dinosaur lived in harmony, and Final Fantasy VII had a budget around $50 million. The most expensive game of its time. Mario 64 cost $20 million. So, these narrative, point-and-click, walking simulator games cost not half, not 10%, but around 1% of the cost of the most expensive games of their time. I want to repeat that. The biggest cinematic and narrative games, they cost 1% of what it cost to make the era's biggest blockbusters. And both Myst and Monkey Island are still legends to this day. And what do we have now? Narrative cinematic games have become the most expensive games. It costs as much or sometimes even more to make a Hellblade, a God of War, Last of Us 2, and of course Concord. These all focus very heavily on graphics, the cinematics, and the narrative. And it costs as much or more than it would to make something like Metaphor, Wuchang, Baldur's Gate 3, Elden Ring, games which may have story, and they may have nice visuals, they may have great style, and so on, but they also have combat, exploration, gameplay. They can rely on the game elements of the game, and they'll be widely praised for it, and are often games with plenty of replay value, something cinematic games by their nature have almost none of. It has become a really negative thing that so many games are trying to appeal to everyone, trying to be that game that every streamer will play and their audience will all hop on. Assassin's Creed is now barely indistinguishable from any other go here, collect this, big fight to take a point of interest game, and while the last few AC games might have had people who hate stealth games happy, the reality is that new audience is going to maybe pick up every third or fourth big Assassin's Creed release and might not even finish it when they do. Well, the original, loyal fans who used to obsessively completionist run every single game in the franchise, they might stop buying them at all. Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones showed that these nerd culture franchises could reach large audiences by just being what they were made to be. They already had broad appeal and didn't need to be changed to be more like a CW, romance-laden, shallow slop. Unfortunately, they drew the attention of a lot of people that liked the mainstream attention. They liked the audience that these things were getting, but they didn't like the content themselves. And at some point, the same thing of the entertainment industry largely centralized in a few massive cities under the power of a few major corporations and with very little diversity of thought or diversity of experience, the industry decided they could use nerd culture, a culture they never really liked, but now saw a way to profit from, to push their ideology on a large audience. An audience they assumed would always stay with the comics, the games, the fantasy and sci-fi stories, no matter how much they butchered the lore, simply because so many of these franchises they got their grubby little hands on have been around for decades, some getting closer to a century. And those fans have been loyal so long, surely that loyalty would stay no matter what they did. Well now, in just a decade, that cross-generational growth, that loyalty, was shattered. Instead of appealing to everyone, all of these things now appeal to nobody at all. Souls games buck the convention of trying to appeal to everyone. They just try to appeal to gamers. Naturally, this angers the people who hate games, but the regular success of the genre shows that gamers are not growing fatigued by Soulslikes, because they're a game style that revolve around just being a game. This is similar for so many games meant to just be a game. Vampire Survival, Balatro, they were shock massive indie hits, and they are pure games. Lethal Company, Among Us, Fall Guys, Schedule 1. So if there is a form of fatigue, it is for the games that are not actually games. These narrative games were fine when they were just some niches. But after The Last of Us 2, studios and fans of movies and TV shows seem to be under the impression this was a gaming gold rush. And we ended up with years of nothing but these cinematic games from the AAA studios. Well, the visuals and the storytelling and the character design and the dialogue all got progressively more progressive and progressively worse. Life is Strange came out when it was an anomaly, when it was a rare sort of game, and it managed to sell 20 million copies. That's what a game like that can do when it's a rare kind of game. That studio's developers just made Bloomins and Rage, the exact same kind of game for the exact same kind of audience. However, now there's hundreds of Life is Strange clones, and they're all vying for a very small audience. So Lost Records didn't sell 10% of what Life is Strange did. It didn't sell 1%. It barely managed 0.1% of the sales. You want to know what fatigue looks like? That is what fatigue looks like. What gamers want is not specifically Souls-like games. They want games that are meant to be games. What games were until activists started to take over in the early 2010s. Souls games are just one such game that focuses on being a game, and it does it extremely well. However, if you give AA and indie studios enough time and enough support without the interference of activist consultants, all the different types of games we had in the 90s and the 2000s, arcade, straight to action, just gameplay focused games, the likes of Vampire Survivors and Balatro, we will have breakouts in every style of game. A death of games that try to be a game for everyone, but at the same time, the birth of hundreds of great games, which together manage to ensure there's a type of game for everyone. There's another thing I want to talk about when it comes to keeping gamers happy, which really should be the goal of all studios, something that studios have completely forgotten. Maybe one of the most customer-friendly actions that some studios are taking. Nioh 3, it is a game I was waiting for. I needed zero convincing. You show me the name and I'm buying it. But they didn't leave it at that. They could have coasted off the greatness of their prior two games all the way to launch, but they have the confidence that long before the release, they're still in an alpha, they put out a demo. Compare that to all these modern games like CDPR's Cyberpunk, which kept gamers in the dark until the day it launched. It was hyped up, it was lied about by the corrupt gaming media right until gamers were buying the game. Or Redfall, where a select group of deceptive shills for Xbox played the game for a few hours and then went around and lied to everyone about how amazing the game was, only for far more reputable content creators to show up in under half an hour of gameplay how broken and awful the game actually was when it came out. A demo is the best way to build confidence. If you put out a demo of your game that I can put a few hours into, or at the very least, get a good grasp on how the game will play, that lets me rely on the most reliable person in the world, myself. And it lets you do the same. Rely on me. Kidding, of course. Letting gamers try it for themselves rather than having information go solely through games media corporations with zero ethics takes away the power of corporate bribe journalists who advertise for big companies and hate gamers. And it gives the power to the people. That 6-hour demo of Metaphor last year is why I bought the game. The demos of games like Nioh 3, Monster Hunter Wilds, they hype me up for a good game before it comes out. Even if you release a demo when the game comes out, letting people be their own guide, their own reviewer, and their own journalist is a move that is both good for gamers and it shows confidence and trust from the studio. Cyberpunk was a deliberate deception, one that combined the might of a huge corporation with the message control of corrupt journalists who deliberately deprive customers of purchase-relevant information. It was disgusting and it was vile. One of the key evil acts that caused so many to wake up to just how rotted out the entire games media industry truly was. But when corporations freely communicate through social media and when they give gamers demos to make their own judgment, it takes out the middleman. It forces companies to be more transparent and it lets gamers make purchasing decisions they can be proud of. It allows communication between studio and gamer. It helps both understand each other. And this is one of the keys for functional capitalism. The ability to know what you are buying so you can make informed decisions with your hard-earned money. And we no longer have to let activist socialists who actively deceive the proletariat while gleefully croning up to huge corporations disrupt this any longer. But you know who will never sell you out to a corporation for access and kickbacks? If you do, let me know. In the meantime, like, subscribe, and leave a comment on what you love or hate about Souls or the reveals at this year's Not E3. Cinematic games are just movies where you have to press the play button on the remote every 30 seconds. Come at me, narrative games lovers. I apologize for absolutely nothing.